Okay, so we've talked about the kind of exam process, revision, within the exam and kind of common faults. The other thing I kind of touched on at the start was actually developing the ability of your memory and being able to recall and remember information. So kind of a key point, our brains take in much more information that we need, and if we don't actively use that information, it becomes much harder to access and remember. The way we take information in also affects the way that we remember. So, if you think to different examples of where you were able to remember, it might be that you're more of a visual learner and seeing an image or a diagram or a picture or video is going to help you, or whether it's that you kind of like listening to things, then use those tools to help you remember these things. Your short-term memory is your small, immediate working memory, and then you've got your long-term memory where you create and build and reinforce over time. So if you want to learn something, then we actually actively have to choose what you want to remember and decide how you're actually going to remember that. So we need to self-test to see that we have learned the key information. And this is why I've kind of mentioned in the previous session about kind of learning your content as you go, self-testing, coming up with different approaches to remembering this information. So what I've got a little task for you now, it's really to start to get you think about different memory strategies that we use to remember different types of information. So what I'd like to do is try to recall each of the items below, and after each one, okay, when you've asked yourself the question, what did you do to help you remember that? Okay, so I'll give an example. What is your best friend or a family member's phone number? Okay, so how did I remember that? I've remembered my mum's phone number. How did I actually think about remembering that? Is it recall it stored in my memory? Have I written it down somewhere and it's a visual thing? So think about, for the following questions, how actually you were able to remember it. Okay, question number 2, how do you use a pencil sharpener? Okay, how did you remember, or how would you remember how to use one? What was your first day of school like? Maybe what did you wear yesterday? Where are your best clothes now? Where's your favourite t-shirt or jumper or whatever it is you like wearing? Where is it? And how do you know where to get to your nearest post box, for example? Okay, so what I'd like to do is think about all those questions and think about, remembering and that thought process, how you were able to remember that. Spend a couple of minutes on doing that now. Okay, so obviously you've spent a bit of time thinking about those key questions and how you were able to remember them. You probably use different strategies for different ones, and everyone will be slightly different. Different people use different strategies. So the way you remember the phone number compared to the way you remembered the first day of school, the phone number would be more sort of a fact strategy, whereas the first day of school would be an event strategy. So fact strategies will be seeing things in your mind, hearing your voice say the number, writing the number down, recalling it. The event strategies is more to do with your emotional memory, your visual memory and memory recall, so what you've experienced and how you experienced that first day of school. The reason I've kind of done this little task with you is to actually get you to start thinking is, what is the best mechanisms for the different types of information that you're working on, but also what ways you remember and what ways you use to remember information, because then you need to play to your strengths to help you remember and revise for exams. So looking at how the memory works, this is the stages of memory interaction. So you've got the input, which is your short-term working memory. So the system needs to be primed to take in information. So you need to be open. So sitting there in a lecture or watching a video, half asleep, not engaged, well then you're kind of setting yourself up for a bit of a fall anyway. So your initial point is actually being engaged in the content. Processing, this is your working memory and working toward your long-term memory. So the system needs to be well organised so it stores information ready for quick access. So these are the kind of tools and things you need to do to help you develop that long-term memory about the topic or subject you're looking at. Then the output. So this is the working and long-term memory. So the system needs to be able to promote it to retrieve and recall information. And there's lots of different ways and tools and kind of practical activities that can help you do this. So breaking that down a little bit further, there's the 4 stages to memory. So as I've said, it's taking the information in, noticing the information and absorbing it. So when you're watching your videos, when you're attending lectures, and reading, it's important you're actually taking the information. It's not just kind of going in one ear out the other. It's about retaining it. So retaining it in your short-term memory, it's encoding it. So interacting with the information, working so it stays in your memory and your brain can store it within your long-term memory, and then it's being able to retrieve and recall that information ready for that exam, essay, or whatever it is you're doing. You may remember from previous weeks we did a little task on grouping and memory skills, so I'm going to revisit that and basically again repeating a similar sort of task, but this time we're going to focus on different words. So what I'd like to do is, looking at the list on screen, what I'd like you to do is spend 15 seconds looking at it, and then maybe use a way to kind of help you remember it, recite it, visualize it, okay? And then what I'd like you to do is write down the words you remember. Okay, so hopefully you should have done that little task. Okay, so here the words are. So how many words did you actually remember from that list? Is it quite easy? What mechanisms did you use? Now what we're going to do is move on and look at that grouping. So we have done this in a previous session, but I just wanted to kind of recap and refresh your memory around it. So now we've got the second list. Again, now they're kind of grouped and with underlined words. So what I'd like you to do now, 15 seconds, look at the list. Obviously you've got some slightly different words on there. Look at the list, try and remember it, and then we'll revisit. So you've got about 15 seconds to remember. It'll come off screen, and then you're going to try and write down as many words as you can. Okay, so you had that kind of little short period to look at the list and write down your answers. Were you better at the second time? Was that grouping strategy and that kind of visual list method a better way of remembering? It may be for some, it may not be for others. So it's thinking about different ways and approaches that we can help remember and group information so we're able to remember it better and increase our memory. So grouping similar items together can help recall and create subheadings. Having separate boundaries and more manageable tasks can also improve your memory capacity. So for example, we've touched on this before, you may use a whole array of different visual formats to help you link, remember, lists, bullet points, concept maps, hierarchies, pyramids, to actually help you remember these key information and topics. Okay, so to conclude this little session on memories, or memory aids, it's really important, it's around repetition, so kind of repeating and recapping the key information. Revisiting it. It's around active learning or by association, so being involved in that process, coming up with strategies to remember that. It's around active listening, so we're not switched off, we're kind of engaged in material. It's about writing things down, but it's also about personalising it. So finding the mechanism that works the best for you, maybe numbering it, turn it into a diagram, saying it out loud, whatever works. Might use a number of approaches to help you remember the information. It's about getting the information to stick in your long-term memory, so it might be breaking down facts into bite-sized chunks, going over them regularly and practicing recalling the information or facts. For today's session, we've looked at exams and how to prepare for exams. This task will basically ask you to use some of the techniques during today's session to complete an MCQ test. So considering the content of today's session on examiner revision, complete the MCQ test on Blackboard on referencing. I've chosen to do this on referencing as I think it's probably a topic that you all probably need to revisit and kind of spend a little bit more time on. So you need to access week 4 videos 1 and 2. The codes are there for you. And then use some of the following tools we've looked at today to revise and learn and prepare for this short MCQ test. So maybe make some notes, do some revision maps or some memory aids just to revisit those referencing skills.